The educator Dr. Maria Montessori once said,
"The child developing harmoniously and the adult improving himself at his side make a very exciting and attractive picture."
Welcome to Montessori Education with me, Jesse McCarthy, where we talk raising children and educating students while bettering ourselves right alongside them. Applying Montessori is not always so simple, and there are all sorts of questions that come up which don't have easy commandment type answers. Actually, one of the most important things about Montessori philosophy for me is that all of us must ultimately understand and apply it uniquely for ourselves. And in today's episode, I have on Simone Davies, and she's the author of a super practical book called The Montessori Toddler. And she's also the creator of an equally practical site called the Montessori Notebook. And we each give our take on a handful of real world questions that come up from Montessori teachers and parents. A few examples are, when to step in to stop or correct a child, what to do about children bickering and fighting, what role does testing play in Montessori. We cover many others, but I just want to give you a quick few there. Now, before we hop in, 3 quick notes. Number 1, this episode is also available in separate chunks on YouTube, where we called it Gray Areas in Montessori. So if you'd like to see our faces and are only interested in particular questions, head over there. Number 2, because we kind of did this episode in specific question-answer format, I had to do some editing that I normally don't do, so just forgive any awkward transitions. And number 3, you might hear a child in the background at some point, and just my apologies. I was on the road recording at a friend's house, and they have a cute little preschooler who got up early in the morning and decided to visit me. So I'd say one last thing. Simone and I, we hop right into questions, so no messing around. So just get ready.
Okay. Jesse, how much do you think that we should let the child lead when choosing their activities versus giving them formal presentations, even like at home, showing them how an activity works?
Okay. Yeah, and I'm actually really excited to hear your answer on this, particularly in the toddler environment, because that experience, I'm very curious about how different Montessorians approach this. For myself, I think I'm going to talk the most broad, and I would say I think of it as a combination of always keeping in mind like the long range goal of aiding this child towards independence and their own personal self, and also with the enjoyment in the moment. So in answering this question, like letting a child kind of choose activities versus I'm going to give him a formal presentation, I think it's really dangerous when the formal presentations become like, now it's learning time. And it's this educational moment when in life, it's not really how things work. Like this is educational time. I think it all should be kind of one, that we're just living life. And here's something that's really curious. It's like if we were out there, roaming around in the forest, just, cruising around, looking at things. We go, oh, look at that tree. I wonder what that's all about. And then we just start looking at the tree. Now, is that a formal presentation? So in Montessori, I think sometimes we can get stuck in these kind of, okay, now it's work time. And now it's the child just kind of doing his thing. When I think of it all as one. So that's kind of the backdrop on my end, the way I approach it. So maybe just throw that back at you. What do you think of that in relation to this question?
Yeah, I think that it's true that sometimes we think this is a learning moment and then the rest is not. And then as you become a Montessori trained teacher or you become a more Montessori parent, you realize that you don't just finish school and stop learning. You are learning through everything and through every conversation. So I think you're totally right about that. And I think the thing that I find interesting about this question is that when I did my Montessori training, we have very formal presentations that we learn. And we practiced them so well that I thought that when I had a real child in front of me, they would watch my full presentation of the hand washing activity. And then actually in real life, the more now I've been working in a Montessori classroom for 15 years, and I realized that actually when I follow the child and the child's interest, which is what Montessori is about, then I'm more likely to engage. So rather than having a plan, which is actually top-down learning, like I want to give this child this lesson about this thing right now, but it's not related to what they're doing, which is particularly relevant for a toddler who lives in right that moment, then I find that the learning becomes much more natural and it's much more effective than me coming up to a child going, oh, I want to show you the scissor cutting activity. And then 50% of the time they just walk away because that's not what's really engaging them right now. So how I'm working in the classroom a lot at the moment is a child goes over to, say, the coin box, and they're trying to get the coin in. And I just keep observing to see how they're going. And maybe when they get stuck because all the coins are inside the box and they can't get the lock open, then I might say, oh, would you like some help? Look, and show them how the coin box opens, and then step back and see how they continue on. And so then I'm really just supporting, following their interest, and then step back to see how they get on. And what I'm also seeing is because we've got mixed age groups in a Montessori classroom, there's so much informal lessons, presentations being going on by the younger children watching the older children. Like, this is just what I find so much. So particularly in a toddler classroom, it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal presentation by an adult. It can be an older child working with material, and that's how then you'll see a younger child go up and give it a try. What I do really like, though, is say you've seen a child coming to class and they're really struggling with their zipper, on their jacket, and then you say, oh, you know what, in the classroom I have like a dressing frame and we could practice that together. Then I still think you're following the child, because you see that they're interested, they need some practice with it, and you can use that kind of thing to give a formal presentation.
Yeah, I really like a few of the things you've pointed out, and I want to hop on a couple, because first, the idea of like when you were trained, you got these formal presentations. So like Simone, I was trained too. I was trained primary 3 to 6. I wasn't in the classroom teaching for years as Simone was doing, but it's funny because the training you have these very formal presentations. You're either acting as the child yourself with another adult, or, an adult and you are acting as the child. And man, like, you have this sense that, oh, when I get out of here, then I could just present these and the child will sit there and listen and everything's going to be beautiful. And that's just not the reality. So that's one thing I thought was cool, what you were saying. And then the second thing is, so the lessons, what I like about Montessori trainings, and I know you were in AMI, Simone?
That's
okay,
right.
So I was trained AMI too, and I don't have this breadth of knowledge of sitting in on AMS and all these other ones, but I'll just speak broadly and consider that this is how it's done in other places. But when you're given these formal lessons, you really learn through and through what the lesson is, what its purpose is, how to give it, like in this quote ideal state when the child's just sitting there. So I think that's hugely important to know what the presentations are and really understand their value, both in the moment, philosophically, long range. But then as Simone, as you're saying, which is just so cool to get these kind of concrete examples of it, is like in the actual moment, you don't go in and go, now I'm going to give you a zipper lesson. Like it comes naturally. And this is why I think this, when do you let the child choose activities versus giving presentation, there might be something off about the way we're thinking about that question, because it all integrates in the end. So I just appreciate the way that you kind of like phrased that and gave a few examples of how that works, like realistically in the classroom. You're still giving presentations. It's just not this, now we sit down and formalize everything, Yeah.
So. And I like actually that we know the presentation so well, so you can actually improvise with a real child, So if I'm giving a language lesson and someone, is just putting it in their mouth, I can say, oh, that's the shark, and give them the names of it, even if I'm not, first touching it and feeling around it like I would in my formal presentation and that kind of thing.
And I wonder, Simone, and this is a big thing that comes up, and I deal a lot with this when working with teachers, is the early teachers that don't yet have that kind of, it hasn't become ingrained in their own minds. So it's so much extra work. And I think there's a way in which it's easier to just say, well, I'm going to give this presentation now, because it's hard to hold all of those presentations that you just learned as a teacher. Or if you're a parent, I mean, my God, there's so many things running around in your head and it's like, what do I do now? So, as you get more and more experience in the classroom as a veteran, as you were just saying, like it just comes up naturally and you can integrate it. But I think it's going to be much more challenging for new parents, new teachers to not have it feel a little bit more formal. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really difficult for parents especially, and for teachers, is to trust that the child is going to get to all areas of the classroom or all activities, or to learn to read, or to learn to write, or to learn to run, or to walk, because, it takes a lot of trust to step back and follow the child. And I think another thing that we sometimes misunderstand when we use this word follow the child is that the child can do whatever they want, which is maybe leads into the whole setting limits. So actually, if the child crosses a boundary for myself, for themselves, or for the environment, or for someone else, then I'm going to step in and set a kind and clear limit. So I think people who say, oh, we followed the child, so we just let them do whatever they like, they've also misunderstood a little bit as well.
So I think I'm happy you just said that. And I think that will go into a question that I have for you here. So when do you step in to stop or correct a child? So I know that's for me, it seems very specific at times, but are there any kind of more generalized ideas around this that come to mind for you?
Well, yeah, to me, that is the rule that I use in my own head, because I like to kind of have some guidelines for myself. So if they're exploring, for example, using a watering can instead of watering a plant, and they're filling up a bucket with it, I could make a mental note thinking, okay, well, the child's concentrating right now. They're exploring how they're using and pouring, and they're not hurting themselves. They're not hurting someone else or myself or the environment. So I'm going to let them continue with that. But when they start using a glass and banging it on a window, then that's not going to be okay. So could break. So they could hurt themselves. And so then I'll show them, oh, this is a glass, it's for drinking. Are you thirsty, or should we find something else to use to clean the window with, or whatever they're, trying to get at. So it's usually for me that very clear boundary. Like I want to preserve their concentration as much as possible. And as a young teacher, I was definitely like, well, the watering can's for watering plants, I better go and correct them, And then actually remembering this phrase that we have in Montessori, which is teach by teaching, not by correcting. And I find that really, really important to remember. It's like, actually, how can I make a mental note and show them next time they come over to the watering can, or maybe they go and refill the watering can, and I could say, oh, would you like to use that to water the plants now, or are you still finishing it? So I can also invite an opportunity to show them how a watering can would be used at another time. It's like finding more a neutral moment.
Yeah. And so in thinking about this, like just practically what this might look like is if a child is holding something the wrong way, we don't stop him and say, well, now we need to hold it the right way, and then like manipulate his hands. But the next day we might have an opportunity to just be, holding something the right way and know that he's seeing us do it or giving a lesson. So in a way we're quote correcting, but it's not really the traditional view of how you correct somebody and go, wait, you're not really doing it properly. You just re-show it another day and they absorb what you did. Right.
Yeah. And like say a child slams a door, for example, when they come home, you could go in and say, we don't slam the door, and give them this whole rant at that moment. Right. Or you can make that mental note to think, okay, I really want them to close the door in a more safe way. And so again, I kind of just wait till it's a neutral moment. It could be even the next day or later that afternoon, like, oh, I just wanted to show you something about the door. I noticed when you closed it earlier, I was worried about your fingers. Look. And then really overemphasize, you can't see me right now, but I'm modeling closing a door really quietly.
Simone is closing a door, people that are listening on audio only. But Simone, so I'm curious, it was such a sea change for me, this correcting point, because I was, started out in relatively traditional schooling, and man, there was red all over the papers. I actually ended up switching a year later to blue, but there was blue writing all over the papers. This was with older children, like 4th through 8th grade. I thought that was my big move. I'm going to go from red to blue all over their papers, the editing. But this idea of not correcting in the moment, and I think of it as not correcting in the moment because you are somewhat correcting, it's just in a different way. Because by you, Simone, by saying that later, this is how I close the door. In a way, we got to be honest with ourselves. We're trying to change a child's behavior, or at least help them to change the way that they act. But there is a difference between you had said oh, if you slam the door and it gets in somebody's, fingers. I remember as a kid, it's crazy. I slammed a glass door by accident, and literally a young girl, her finger got caught in there. She had to re-rush to hospital. It was horrible. And I have this vivid image. So accidents obviously are going to happen, but those seriously dangerous things in your house or in the classroom, like a kid goes over and literally decides, I'm angry at another child, I'm going to punch him. In the moment, we have to respond. So where do you draw a line between responding in the moment and not? You might have some kids.
Yeah. So Yeah, that's okay. Hi, kids. That's real life. So, yeah, correcting. I definitely step in to set a limit when there's safety at stake. So, if two children are hurting each other, then for me it's super clear. With siblings, for example, I almost have in my head like a thermometer. So, like if it's low level bickering, I kind of like, okay, they can just see that I'm standing here and observing them. But I'm just seeing how the situation is. They know that an adult's around, but I'm not actually going to interfere. This is just, some negotiation skills being learned right now. And then it might escalate where I might need to say, oh, I can see you two are play fighting. Are you guys both having fun? Or we had a rule in our house, which was rough play by mutual consent. And so I might say, does someone need to say stop right now, so that they would stop fighting. And we never had any problem about that. So that's like when it escalates. And then if two kids are really going to hurt each other, then I'm like, I can't let you hurt each other. We're going to keep each other safe. And you go here and you go here. And with young children, I'd just be standing between them, on the couch. And other older children might want to take it outside or go to their rooms or whatever, but it's not in a punishment way. It's just keeping them safe. So I have no problem with setting a limit, and that's different to, correcting, or it's just everyone calm down and then you can come back and solve the problem,
Yeah, and
make amends basically.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about like how to treat it as you've got some principles behind you, but then you adapt based on the situation. So I even like what you're saying, because siblings is often, this always comes up with siblings. Not always, I shouldn't say. There's some siblings just love each other and everything's beautiful all the time, but that's the rarity, right? But with siblings, you're going to have like literal fights, and then you're going to have like roughhousing. Like that is just the way life is. And it's difficult for me because in schooling, it's almost like you can't have any of that at school. And I know home and school is different, but I wonder how much culturally do you think we've gone too far with not allowing that at school? Because I think if you're a teacher today, if you're working with any children of, I don't know what age, but let's say 2 and above, at some point on the playground or outside, if they're outdoors, they like to rough around. Like that's what a lot of children do. But we have to constantly be on them at least at school because of, you can't push people, you can't shove. But I like what you were saying about you had this roughhousing rule. Is everybody okay with this thing? What do you think about that in school?
Yeah, so for me, I've never really seen children in my class under 4, rough playing with someone. Sometimes they want to cuddle another child, and then I'm kind of there to like translate for both children, because I have mostly children who are quite not very articulate under 4. So to just say, oh, he really wants to give you a hug, and do you want to have a hug too? Just to check that everyone's enjoying it, particularly when I'm looking at the body language and they're not enjoying it and it looks like they really would like some help to get out of that situation.
So maybe
I think that
I think it's age.
Like rough play. Yeah, I think it could be age, but I also think having some guidelines, like you said, guidelines, I think what work for me is like this rough play by mutual consent, is that maybe there is a way that children can be a little bit kind of bouncy with each other, even in a school place, but there is that very clear, like teaching them about consent. And I think that's really valid.
Yeah. So I think maybe getting into that, what does consent mean? Are we both enjoying this? And yeah, I don't tend to see like two-year-olds like rolling around wrestling. But man, once you get to like 4.5, 5, and then into early elementary, that's huge, So and it's boys and girls. Oftentimes it's more boys, but I've seen girls, rock and roll and just roll around with guys. So, but it's just a different thing at home versus school. And I'm just wondering if the reality is you can allow more at home with your own children than what you can at school. And that's just the reality.
And what we found, which is really interesting, was about the languaging of how you stop somebody, because if they were kind of like tickling each other and they're going, no, it's really hard to hear that no as clear. So we came up with the word stop was when they really weren't enjoying it. And what I often heard is someone was trying to say stop. I said, and then I could actually be another voice like, oh, I heard someone say stop right now. And that was enough to break up whatever was going on.
Yeah, I think
does that make sense?
Yeah, and I like that, because I think the word no, clearly you're working with toddlers, so no just becomes this amazing word. I can use it at any moment. But I like that you're replacing it with this is, I wouldn't say like an emergency word, but it's one word that clearly means I'm not playing around. Like this isn't about me being tickled. This isn't about me just being, no. This is stop, and then they treat it seriously. They treat that word significantly.
And then also I have also given like my kids the word, like they're rough playing and I'm hearing someone actually not enjoying it. And then I'm saying, does someone need to say stop now? And then they've remembered, oh yeah, stop, 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 So in
Yeah.
that moment, they've also kind of forgotten what they need to say.
Yeah.
So then you're giving them a tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great? We need this tool for adults as well, don't we? I mean,
Well,
it's like,
basically they become adults as
yeah, I
well.
know.
So, Jesse, for someone on a budget, what three things do you think would you suggest as being things you'd prioritize making available in the home? And it could be activities, it could be furniture, it could be, whatever come to mind.
Yeah. So, funny enough, it just occurred to me now. I hear this or I see a lot of posts about, these Montessorians with all this money. I just made this and it cost me 50 cents or something. And it's funny because I hear these things and I think it's cool. People are creating like really inexpensive things, but it's also, I started to think like, it's not that expensive to really do stuff unless you're talking about like making a Montessori classroom, like $30,000 classroom. But otherwise you can do a lot of cool stuff. Like, and it's really Montessori and it's not too expensive. So generally speaking, I like the idea of kind of creating stuff, but also you can spend a little bit of money, like save some money for some cool items that actually are helpful. And maybe you have more experience in the toddler level with what those might look like. Some of the, like a few more expensive items versus the budget ones. But in terms of budget stuff, I mean, one thing that comes to mind easily, like low shelving, like those now are so cheap and they're all over the place. So, when I was thinking about this question, I thought, well, yeah, listen, if you really don't have money, go out to like Home Depot, get some wood, get some nails, get some sandpaper and get some paint and make some low shelving. And I mean, I think that'd be kind of cool if you do that, with your husband or if you're a man with your wife or whatever you guys have in your relationship, go out and do that. But I'm thinking it's probably cheaper now to go buy all that fully made at like IKEA or something. And there's low shelving. So low shelving immediately comes to mind. I have a few others, but I wanted to jump and see, what do you think of that so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think making things accessible is great. And I've even been to houses where they rent, so they can't, or they don't want to invest in shelving even. So we've kind of like used the inside of a wardrobe that's built in and made the low shelves there, like a spot where you can put the toys. In Amsterdam, we have quite low window sills. Is that what you call it? Where like the bottom of a window and you can lay three puzzles along a windowsill.
Yeah.
Or some people might use a coffee table, and it's just about limiting the activities as well. So I do think you can be creative, and like you say, like nowadays you can buy quite cheap shelves. And I think the shelving is kind of attractive and makes us go back to Montessori principles about less is more. If I just have out six things in a nice attractive trays and baskets so the children can help themselves, then you really find that you don't just have toys lying around that you've had out for years, but really they're only things that your child's working to master right now. So you'll find them much more engaged and much more likely to put them back, and there's less things to trip over. So I just think it's a win-win. Yeah, of course.
And I think I'm also raising that kind of like, get something nice too. Cause like I have there's this play area behind me. This is not my like work area. I'm in somebody's house and they have a few kids, so this is their attic. But like behind me, there's a different bunch of cool stuff. But then there's just like, a brown box, like an empty brown box that we all know. Like you give that to a kid and they'll figure something out fun with that. So it's cool to have these kind of budget things, but also have something that's really pretty and delicate to you or something like that. I think that's really cool to have an item it doesn't have to be, thousands of dollars or something, or even hundreds of dollars, but mix it up so it's not just all homemade kind of, I don't want to say it's not trashy because you can make really nice stuff homemade, but every now and again, like I know it's particularly from Europe, like I see some of these wooden carved toys that there aren't a lot of them in America. So when I have to get one of those, like I bought one actually for my mom, this little owl, I think it might've been from, the Netherlands, but it was this carved owl painted, but it cost $17 for this little thing. But all of the items don't have to be $17. Like 10 of them could be 50 cents and that you have this one pretty one. So I'm curious, what do you think about that? Just ensuring that something's beautiful around the house,
Yeah, I think that we often think of toys as what children are going to traditionally want to play with, but actually having beautiful items. I think that's something that you can also show children. We have special things in our house, and or even cultural items, because here in the Netherlands, we have a lot of people who have different backgrounds who are, in relationships, and it's really nice for a Japanese parent to be able to, show some piece of artwork from, Japan, as well as a parent from the Netherlands, and, they can have their traditions and cultures being shown with beautiful items around the home. And it might even be then having some clogs that are hanging on the wall, but sometimes they come down and the kids play around with them. Not many people are walking around with wooden clogs these days, but it's definitely part of living in Holland.
Can I just ask you, it's funny just raising clogs. What were people doing with those things? Like when they actually farm? It's just so amazing, because kids will ask me, like, why were people wearing those? Like, what was going on?
It rains a lot in the Netherlands, so it's pretty wet up in the paddocks.
Anyway,
yeah, super funny. I think another thing to mention is that, I don't even think that you should have Montessori materials in the home, once a child starts a preschool environment anyway, that the pink tower and the brown stair and all the sensorial materials really, particularly if your child is attending a Montessori school, they're not going to be engaged with the materials if you have the same materials at home. And that's when it gets expensive. If you're trying to set up a Montessori classroom in your own house, where really what kind of things would a child want to play with when they're at home? And I'd have more open-ended things for them to explore and go outside into nature, and setting up my home so they're accessible to the child. So things like setting up my kitchen so that the kitchen drawer has their plates down low. So all of these things actually don't cost any money to do, because they're things that, you're in your house, but how you set them up is in a way that the child can be successful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny because one of the things I had, I was like, what do you do in your house? And I said, the real thing you should be doing is getting out of the house. So when you said go out in nature. So I think that's one of the budget things you can do. And I mean, I think about as an adult, wherever you are, there's so many little nooks and areas in your city that you have not seen. So you just imagine a child outside. It's just any time you walk around, it's going to be something new, So I say get out of the house on a budget, so.
Yeah. And then also I think for young kids, having a step stool available that they can use in the kitchen or use in the bathroom. So my children are 17 and 18, so they didn't have these fancy learning towers, which I think are really great because they do really help a child be successful in the kitchen. But if you're on a budget, it doesn't mean that you have to have all of these things. It means you can. I had a collapsible ladder, the ones they use for painting, and then I would actually just fold it up and put it away because there wasn't room in our kitchen to have something available all the time. And I just needed to make sure that I was standing next to them because there wasn't, the safety of them being able to fall backwards or whatever. But yeah, we never had any problems with it. And I've got a picture of my daughter making a sandwich on that at 16 months. So it gave her a lot more access to be at the adult's height, where all the things were. But otherwise also, a low table is very handy. So when I was doing baking when my kids were really small, I just bring a little table into the kitchen and we'd do some baking down low so I could bring the ingredients down to their height and they could do the mixing and things like that. So there's a few options as well.
I'm happy you raise it. Maybe wherever this is, we'll have some links to, basic ladders and then all the way up if you have the learning towers. I've seen people definitely homemake those things. So it's a little bit safer or seemingly safer. But it's funny how it's the cheapest thing of a learning tower is the learning ladder. And it's a basic painter's ladder or a tiny little stool. So I'm with you. I like that.
But the only thing I would spend money on is books, or at least have a library card. And in most libraries are free, or you would pay a very small amount to have a library card. And we just used to go and get 10 books at the library, and every 3 weeks we'd bring them back. And it's one of my favorite things was walking to the library and swapping books over. And when my children, I actually got really sad one day when my kids were about 13 and 14, and we were walking to the library one Sunday, and I'm like, this is one thing I'm really going to miss. It just all of a sudden you realize you just have to enjoy every little moment because they take themselves to the library now if they ever need to pick up a book for school and things like that. But yeah, books.
Isn't that funny to the books? Because I remember there's a definite time in my life, right about late teens, where I started getting into reading, and then I started realizing, man, my money is going towards books. It's such a weird thing to think that a lot of my money, I'm losing money because I'm buying books. So I like that, but I think it's that important where if your money's going to go somewhere, go in some good books. And
going back to another thing though, is that really what I also find is I feel like it's a bit of a cop out to say I can't afford Montessori, because even if you couldn't make any material or even have a ladder, I really think that Montessori comes back to how you are with the children. Like if I was a teacher and I couldn't afford any Montessori materials for my classroom, but I went and hung out with kids and just was curious about the world around them, supported them through like difficult conversations with each other, went outdoors, played. That to me is more Montessori than any expensive climbing wall that's in my classroom. You know what I mean? Just that honor and respect for a child and the conversations that we can have, the curiosity and the responsibility, those kind of things, they're so important to me, as a Montessori approach.
Go to the core, as you're saying, so I agree.
And actually one question I get asked all the time, I think I'm going to have to write a blog post on it somewhere, is it's kind of like, how can you do Montessori even if your child doesn't go to a Montessori school because we don't have a Montessori school in the area, or we can't afford the Montessori school and that kind of thing. And I really do think that all of these principles apply in how you can parent your child, even if they're at a traditional school. And I guess the biggest conversations that will come up is like, why am I getting punished at school, or why are they giving me a gold star at school and at home we don't do that? That would be like a really fun conversation to just keep having. But other than that, you can apply all of these ideas in your own home.
Yeah. So kind of what you're saying is like, you can be the Montessori parent at home. It's what do you do if you don't have that school, the Montessori school, and your child is in a traditional schooling? How do you integrate those two together? And I think that's a very challenging question. But I love what you're saying. It's like, well, whenever your child comes home, just be that Montessori parent. It doesn't matter where he is during the middle of the day, although it's challenging, but be that Montessori parent. I like that. Cool.
And also like the way that they handle situations that come up from the school, like I missed out on the award of the week or something, that's what they do in a traditional school. And then you can manage it in a Montessori way, which is not to say, oh, don't worry about it, you'll get another time, or to moralize, like not everyone can get the prize, but really like, oh, you were really disappointed? Is that something that was important to you to get? And, to manage those emotions in a way that's very Montessori, which is to, guess the child's feelings and support them in those difficult moments when something doesn't go their way.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying, basically kind of acknowledging emotions, whatever the child brings home. I've seen, and I'm curious if you've seen this, Simone, I've seen people that have environments that they're not too happy with in schooling. So when the child comes home and complains and they get into this, oh, well, your teacher doesn't really know what she's doing. I mean, so you've heard that. Okay. You're shaking your head. Yes. So you've seen that. So what do you think of that?
Well, I think that our attitudes to what the school of choice is really important. And that if you have a negative feeling about it, then maybe you should look for a better option or come to peace with it, because otherwise they're just hearing this negative story. And like, if that's the only environment available, then look at all the positive things that school is giving your child. It's a safe place. It's giving them access to children who live in their local area, because I think that's really important. I know I have a guy who I really respect, and he wants to homeschool his children, but he also wants them to grow up in New York with other kids who grew up in New York. So he just sends them to the local public school. So he gets that. And then he does lots of interesting projects with them on the weekend, and they're opening their own businesses and trying out stuff like that.
Sounds awesome.
So I think there's value. So it's how you view the world. Everything is a choice. So if you don't like your choice, change it.
Change it. I think that's one of the reasons I think I connected with you, Simone, and just is because of just that. I think you have a sense of life, like just what you said. If you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, I mean, it's this kind of old cliche, but then you have to get it to peace with where you're at right now, and I think that is huge for us as adults, and it comes through, I think, in how we model for children. So I raise that because I know I'm really doing that for a lot of teachers out there that they hear, their parent is saying the opposite of what they're saying at school, and they're kind of confrontational about it. And I think that it's a sad situation when you're putting your child kind of in the middle of two adults. So it's better to just acknowledge what the child's bringing at home, but not, rail on the teacher or rail on traditional schooling to your child, because that's going to be problematic. So.
And I remember actually when my son moved from a Montessori school into a non-Montessori high school. And so it was a school that he really liked in the Netherlands in their last year of primary school. And you go and visit all the high schools, and he chose one that was very scientific. But it is a very classical kind of school. So we talked about what the differences will be. Well, you won't be able to just get up from the classroom and go to the toilet. You'll need to tell the teacher that you're going to the bathroom. If you're late to school, they have this thing that if you're late, then you get all these punishments and things like that. And he said things like, well, I think it's a stupid rule, but, and I'm happy with that school. And in the whole time he was in high school, he's now finished just last year. he was late a few times, and they were things like he had a puncture on his bike, or he maybe slept late one day, but they weren't him actually, not wanting to be at school, or, mistrusting the rules. So he kind of did respect the rules. So I think that Montessori kids do, yeah, you can talk to them about the differences and look at it in a positive way. And I was never negative because it was not a classical school. And I had to be really careful as well, because they started to complain about tests in high school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of testing that goes on, and they used to like no testing because the Montessori teachers know where they're up to. So they don't need to test. And I was kind of like, yeah, silly schools, all this testing. And then you're like, oh, actually, how can you use this in a more positive way? And I was kind of questioning them like, oh, I wonder how tests can be used like usefully. Like, so I guess if you don't know, and tests are actually quite fun if you get 10 out of 10 because they just show you
wow.
they know everything,
Yeah.
right? So you could do it that way. Or tests can be a great way to show you what you haven't mastered yet and how are you going to master the last 10%. And so I started changing the way I was talking about the things that I wasn't necessarily 100% in agreement with.
Yeah, and I think that style, that's giving respect to the child that he can form his own opinions throughout life, which I think is huge. And interestingly, you raised tests. It's funny because I was in traditional schooling, and I used to have these long tests, but they weren't multiple choice. They were like really thoughtful. You have to fill in. And children, there would be stress about it, which I think was problematic. Like we were setting them up for this big day when you're going to take the test. But you'd be amazed at how many kids were so excited to share their knowledge on these tests. Because this wasn't like boring history. You fill in A, B, C, D. This was exciting. Like I get to explain how Rome fell. Like it's so I think as Montessorians, or just people in this kind of no testing idea, it's really important to think about what do kids actually enjoy in sharing what they know, and how can we do more of that? Not necessarily testing and going, oh, you're an A student now and you're a B and the rest of your life is ruined because you don't have this 4.0. It's more, but really thinking about, are we giving them time to share what they know? Are we setting aside time for that? Because there are some values in testing. It's just not in the traditional sense of it. I'm curious what your thought. I know you work with toddlers, but as kids get older, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we do have the 3-period lesson, right, in Montessori.
Yeah.
And in so quickly for people who don't know it, it's like if you are teaching them colors, or if you're teaching them some language, first you name them. The second period is playing games, so that they're starting to try these things out. And then the third is when they actually really know the concept. Then you say, oh, what is this called? And then they're really excited to say that's the blue or that's the shark, and so they can. They really love the mastery of the 3rd period lesson. In the under 3s, the toddlers age group, which I work with, we often don't get to the 3rd period lesson unless you know that child knows it very well, because they're often not articulate enough. And if they say that's they're holding up the humpback whale and they call it a shark, the only thing you can say is, no, that's like the wrong thing. So I would always say, oh, you're showing me the humpback whale. So I think that there is value in showing what they know. And I think sometimes we skip over it because we don't want to test them. But I do see a lot of testing going on with young children when we say, oh, look, what color is this? And what color is that? Or do you know the name of that? What does the doggy say? And so I think I don't want to say, please test your child, because I'm worried that quizzing kind of stuff that comes out, it's not that useful. That's not how children are going to learn. They're better off you saying every time you want to say, what color is this? Just tell them, oh, this is blue. That would be a more productive way.
I'm happy you raised that, because that is like, I would say, like 95% plus of parents, and most of these parents are so loving and caring, but there's this constant like, oh, what color is that? What's 2 + 2? It's like nonstop. So what do you think is going on there? I know.
I think that we just want to see our child being successful or something like this. It's almost like, show Nanny and Poppy how you can clap now. We're almost performing, or we're worried that they're not going to learn it. So this is the way that we think they're going to learn. I feel it's a little bit pushy. It's very much top down, which is different to the Montessori approach. Anyway, I'm just conscious of it, and maybe I don't feel bad if you do it, because I know that definitely.
And this show, if you listen to the podcast here, this is not at all about guilting parents that are doing this, because as I just said, 95% of parents are doing this, so guilt the whole world here, basically. But I'm asking it more of like, so I think you pointed out 2 things. One is maybe watch out for wanting to show off your child to others. That's one thing. And then the second thing is pedagogically, or just thinking about how children learn. Like, if you're reading to them Blue, or if you're doing what Simone was doing, these kind of 3-period lessons, they're going to get it. They don't need 10,000 repetitions. Like, show mommy 2 + 2, show daddy 2 + 2. Like, if you teach it to them, if you show it to them in a certain way, they'll absorb it. It's kind of like a language. Like, you don't really sit down and go, this is how you say and, they get it. Anyways, I find that so prevalent and all over that it's just, and it's so difficult to get out of, even when you shouldn't be doing it. It's almost like this natural thing. So,
okay, so should we pivot? It's probably a good jumping off point for technology.
Yeah,
for technology, because
Simone,
so
many
people ask me, like, how do you deal with iPads and technology in your homes with Montessori?
So what do you, particularly, I mean, Simone, you're dealing with toddlers where this is where it just starts. It all starts. I mean, even in infancy. So what are your views? Let's start with that. The youngest age is technology.
Yeah, so I do tend to agree with the doctors and the research that you don't need technology with children under 3 and even under 6. It's all about hands-on learning. You've got a visitor behind you. Hi.
Look, Charlie, you want to come say hi? No? Charlie's like, I'm gonna grab this tiger and get out of here or whatever. Oh no, there he is. See, in our world, there's always a child somewhere in the background. Anyways, go on.
So as I was saying, no, it's all good. So I really believe that in the youngest years, hands-on learning is the most appropriate, and that's actually physically holding something in your hand. And so Dr. Montessori was known to have said, first give something to the hand before you give it to the mind, and for the child to touch and feel and explore. And that's different to tracing a letter on an iPad, even if it's a Montessori app, and people are worried, if I don't expose them to technology, then they're going to be left behind all their peers. And I'm like, if a 2-year-old can open an iPad, they're really not going to be behind. It's so intuitive these days that technology is very easy to grasp. And so I think that technology is such a problem because it sneaks into the day without parents even noticing it. Like, you're in a cafe and you just want them to be quiet for a couple of minutes, so you give them the phone, or you're on the phone, like you're speaking to someone and you just quickly give them the phone and they nag for it. And all of a sudden, I think it was almost easier in the olden days when you had a TV and you turned it on and off. But I think the iPad and the phones just sneak in. And then I'm like, I am actually okay with like Skyping a grandparent, because this is like a phone call and this is about communication, how we connect with other people. And so to say that I'm not going to have any technology in the house isn't always the answer either. I really like Sue Palmer's approach as the children get older. She wrote a book called Toxic Childhood and What You Can Do About It. And even though it was before iPads, the same principles apply for me. And she basically said, do you want to be the family that is a bit freaky because they don't have the TV, they don't even know what's going on in their world? Or do you want to give them just enough exposure to technology so that your child doesn't feel left out, but you're making mindful choices about what they're watching or what technology they're exposed to? So when my children did get bigger, they could have half an hour of computer time, and that could be on a computer or an iPad or TV or, a screen of some sort.
When you say get older, around what time were you doing this limit?
This is like 6 to 12. And actually, even through their high school years, they had mobile phones once they were 12 and above, and they were cycling to school by themselves.
Can I let me throw something at you? First, I just imagine, let's say you're somebody like yourself that's saying thoughtful about technology, but you want to have these Skype sessions with, like, say, a family member, or you just read a lot and you started to read on an iPad. So how does that work with a young child who's seeing mom or dad and they're reading on the iPad?
Yeah, so I would model different ways of reading. I'd have a Kindle for reading, which isn't connected to the internet, and I'd have books and be reading books, and use iPads for, actually, I don't have an iPad. I don't know.
Yeah, see, I like that, Simone. See, I have an iPad, and I can tell you that the app on that I like much better for reading. So I think just in thinking about this, like, as you're saying, be thoughtful about it. So I wonder if you could have an iPad, but you don't have 50,000 apps on there that could just be clicked into and like video games all over the place. But just maybe it's set for one mode and it's got your book on there. And so your child sees you reading,
Yeah, and like that you people say, oh, they keep turning on the TV. I'm like, why do they have access to the remote controls? So
Yeah.
like put the
Yeah.
iPad away, put the TV remote control away when you're not using it. What I think was really interesting is that my kids, even though they had limited amount of technology, they still could code a website, they
Oh,
still
wow.
yeah.
Oh,
So
so where were
my
they then where did they learn it from? If they're only getting half an hour, what did you say? Half an hour a day or half an hour? What?
Yeah, it was half an hour a day at the time.
Okay.
And like I was once working on my own website. I'm like, do you want to know how to build a website here? This is how we open a WordPress website. And we just
Yeah.
started doing, they're like, oh, so you add a menu here. And they were just dragging it around. It's so intuitive for them that they were building websites, really easily. And my daughter once did a coding course at school that
Okay.
they had. And Oliver's now studying computer science at, university. So they're not
Oh,
going to be
nice.
behind their neighbors, their colleagues. And also I found it really important that they knew what Minecraft was so that they didn't feel like left out. But I was also able to control it, and we didn't have the zombie version. They were like playing more the creative mode.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like it's
It's
making mindful choices. There was also a great game called Railroad Tycoon where they designed their own fun park,
yeah.
and they had to like work out
It's like a
how it would be
Sims.
effective. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's kind of like you have choices about what technology your children are exposed to, and so use it very mindfully. But I mean,
Yeah.
people might disagree with me and say I don't see there's any value in
No, I
technology
like
at
it.
all. But it's
And
about finding the right limits for your family.
yeah, and it's funny. By the way, in Minecraft, a child just a few years ago, a child was on me about Minecraft. You got to play this. You got to play this. And then just recently, he's like, you got to get on your iPhone. So it's not just fun to play on the computer, but you got to have on your iPhone. And I mean, I got to tell you, these kids, when you're doing Minecraft, right, that's a thoughtful game. Like, there's a lot going on in that for older children. So you definitely don't sound like the kind of anti-technology, get everything out of your home. It's more being mindful about it. So I really appreciate that. And then the question I would have is, there are things that you can do online, like say coding now, that like if I had an 8-year-old, and this is super dependent on the child's interest, but you can tell his life is like, I want to be a coder. I think I would be much more likely to say, yeah, you know what, go for it. And it's just like something in the classroom that if he was doing math for all day long, 2 months in a row, I might say, okay, it's time. Let's transition over to something else and do it in a proper way. But allow that kind of, I get sucked into something that's actually productive, as opposed to if you're playing, Zelda for, 2 weeks straight on your video game, you're missing out on the world in some way. So I'm curious, would you consider that similar, or you think technology is this kind of all completely separate thing that you just would not allow such involvement?
I think it's hard to say, but I mean, maybe, yeah, if they're coding and you see it as productive and it's like something, there's some super interesting things that they can work out. Like there's a game that I know they're now in high school kind of age, and I'm trying to think of the name of it. And you design rocket ships, and basically he's doing physics, trying to calculate how to get his rocket ship to go out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then, this is like, okay, well, actually, I guess this is almost like a subject area that he's working on. And
Yeah.
so, but what if I also don't think that beyond an hour, it's that much. I think I would want them to get outdoors, and it's just something that it's a choice of how you could use your time. So I'm like, I can see you're really working on that, and I think it's really important that we move our bodies and we're not stuck behind screens. And they're already at school for 6 hours a day, where they're kind of constrained
Yeah.
by four walls often. So I think that's my challenge, is like to give them license, because that stuff can suck you away for hours and hours.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that sedentariness, I think, is the thing that I'd be worried about in that case. So
Yeah,
I
and I
probably
think
would still have some limits around it, and then just be checking in, like, yeah.
And I think this goes full circle, because it's just you've got this broad perspective about the whole child. You're not thinking just, okay, technology has this one rule. It's like, oh, there's also, I want my child moving. So if he was doing some work where he's stationary outside of, quote, technology, you'd still say, hey, well, let's get outside and move a little bit. Like, it's not necessarily like technology is the demon, One other thing I think that's I hear a lot, particularly from men, is like, well, I did pretty well, and I played video games, all throughout junior high and high school. And I mean, I definitely played a lot of video games, particularly in junior high. And I'm curious, what do you think of that argument?
Well, I watched a lot of TV after school. We sat and we could sing all the jingles of all the songs, and I chose not to do that with my kids. I'm like, that's not how I
Yeah.
want them to spend their afternoon. So it's the same argument. It's like, yes, and there's many other things that I would rather you do. So we had, like, for example, I always had a box that had like a little drawer for pencils and a little drawer for scissors and a little drawer for glue and a little drawer with a stapler and lots of paper and comic strips kind of printed out so they could make comic strip books. And they were always making creative stuff with that instead. So then they'd go off and start drawing a Minecraft magazine and, taking their interest into other things. So, yeah, that would be my argument is like, yeah, and I did that, and it's not the choice I would make for my own children.
This was a question you wanted to ask. I think I like it.
Okay. Well, it was like, what characteristics would you value in a Montessori educator or a Montessori parent?
Yeah. So I think it's important that you really enjoy being around children, because this profession is you're around children all the time. So if you don't like children, clearly you're done. And then it's, what age group do you really enjoy? Because I know, Simone, you're working with toddlers. I love toddlers. It's so fun to be around them, but man, I would never, ever, ever, and Simone's looking at me like, let me say one more, never, ever be around toddlers all the time. So you have to really know what your values are, what you enjoy. So experiment with it. Don't get sucked into, well, I was trained 3 to 6, so now I'm a primary teacher for my life. Like, experience the other ages, see what you like. So I think an enjoyment around children, and specifically the age that you would be around, is just huge. Also, what makes for an awesome Montessori educator is a general love of life. Like, you actually enjoy living in this world. Like, it's a fun experience you're excited with continuous learning as an adult. So not just, you're teaching children and you're this teacher, but you are a student throughout your whole life. That's what I've seen in great educators. I have never met an amazing Montessori educator, or just an educator generally, who doesn't have a genuine, like, I really love living. It's a fun time. and I like that I keep learning stuff. Yeah, I just haven't met somebody who's like kind of more miserable or just complaining about life. There's some sense of positivity, So the love of life, enjoyment, pure joy of being around with children. And then just a practical thing, I think, and I'm very curious your take on this, and this actually comes back to the dog whisperer with Cesar Millan, because he has this word, but to be calm and assertive. So he calls it calm assertiveness, but you're a calm, peaceful individual, but you're assertive. So when, and I can only imagine in the toddler environment, you have to be assertive at times. So this kind of calm assertiveness, I think I've seen in the best teachers I've experienced, are just genuinely warm and caring and calm individuals. But boy, when they mean business, they mean business. They're assertive. So anyways, I think those are some of the things that I think of. So Simone.
Well, interestingly, all of those 4 were on my list in different ways. So when
wow.
you said joy, I said fun, like that you just enjoy hanging out with kids. Like I said, the day that I turn up in my Montessori classroom and I'm not having fun, I'm just not going to become a grumpy Montessori teacher. I just don't think those 2 words belong together. So, and I have seen Montessori teachers who stay too long, or they're not getting rested, or the joy's gone for whatever reason. And maybe it can come back, but I don't want to be that grumpy Montessori teacher. The love of life is what I kind of see as curiosity. It's like, how can we be curious about the world? And I was just saying, like, I've been working in the Montessori classroom for 15 years, but every day I learn something new. So I'm also totally open to learning from the people in front of me, from the world around me. So yeah, definitely curiosity. Being kind and clear is what I call the calm assertiveness. So it's how you set a limit with kindness and diplomacy. Like, and you really wanted to do that, and I also need to keep my body safe. So doing it in a kind way. For me, a couple of other things that came to mind was respect. I think it's really important that the teacher shows respect for the child. They're not top-down learning. They're really like seeing this child as an equal, and like, you have your needs and I have my needs, and how can we all have our needs met? I think that seeing other people's perspective and that respect is really important for me. And I think it's something that takes a lot of practice, and I feel like we're just all still learning. I feel like a beginner on it, and I
Yes,
get it
yeah.
wrong, and I have opportunities to apologize. Oh, I'm really sorry. I really thought that I was being clear, but actually I was being too aggressive in that moment. When I really ended up like, I thought I was kindly picking up a child and putting them somewhere safe, but actually my
Yeah.
hands weren't as soft as I really wanted to be. So I think that those kind of things all came up for me. That's really the only extra one I had, was that respect and seeing the
Respect.
other child's perspective. And I guess for a parent, like these characteristics, I challenge you to seek those out as on your parenting journey. How can you move from feeling a bit grumpy and tired to, oh, how can I be curious about the world around me? And how can I find joy in this moment instead of, oh my gosh, it's 5 o'clock in the morning and my child wants me out of bed?
Yeah,
And
that
probably how I can set kind and clear limits as opposed to being very laissez-faire and then snapping because you've let the situation go too far. So I think that they're not fixed characteristics. I think they're all things that we can learn and keep adding to our toolbox and bring back joy to the classroom and to our homes.
into the home. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, because I mean, we did just throw out some pretty, idealistic, lovely things, and whether you're a teacher or a parent, there are those moments where it's just like, so I think these are the things that we're constantly stretching for and doing in our lives. But even what you raised as a concrete example is that you're apologizing. Like after you've got your website, you've been doing this for years, you've got your program, but you find that sometimes you have to apologize to a child because you did something that wasn't really fitting or respectful. And I've been in this for over 15 years. Same thing. It's amazing. And don't you now, like before, I think it would give me a little bit of stress. Like, oh, now it's like, it's so immediate. It's like, oh man, I messed up. I got to go say sorry to that guy. It's not a big issue. And they do, as you were saying, kind of, it's this mutual respect. So when you show that, man, how much more respect they give you, they're like, did he just apologize to me? It's just this feeling of like this warmth almost, and it's that it comes from the respect. I think you're right. So I think I would add respect as well. So
Cool. Oh, it's been such a fun conversation.
yeah. So yeah, it's been, I'm so happy that we actually went through all of these, Simone, and to be straight with you guys out there, Simone and I were like thinking, well, let's do maybe one of these each week and really think deeply about it and write out notes. And we just hopped on to kind of just see how it went, just go through all of them. And I don't know, I'm pretty happy with how we had a good conversation. I enjoyed it. Simone, what do
Yeah,
you
it's
think?
been delightful. I think it's been delightful. I hope it's just really like, as you can see, Jesse and I don't have any of the answers, but it's just opening up
Yeah.
conversations, a starting point for you guys to think about this and see, what resonates for you. And hopefully just start conversations about, what is Montessori? How can we, embrace all these ideas and just keep, the reason we're doing it. I think from what I see from you as well, Jesse, is we just want to bring more joy into the world and make it a more peaceful
Yeah.
world. And it's just one teacher at a time, one family at a time. And I think that, I'd see so much amazing work being done around the world. And it's really, really, it's almost hopeful.
Yeah, almost. Simone says it's almost hopeful. Well, I'd go even further and be like, Simone, I think if we're rocking this right now, and man, I've learned so much from people out there that have gotten me to the point where I feel, pretty comfortable with children, but continuously learning, as you're talking about, and like getting the conversation going. I am incredibly hopeful, and part of that's with Simone here, being able to speak with her and going through some of these things. And for everybody else that's out there, I think, Simone, you had said in one of the questions we were going over that you go in and these parents really, they're like, there's something special, because we're talking now and you had said that you had this special time with the parents, you gave them a rose and so forth, that they're, even after this long and you being, quote, the expert, you go in and you're kind of amazed by the people you work with, the parents.
Yeah, I think I just had this reflection this week. It's Mother's Day coming up when we're recording this on Sunday. And I just wanted to give the parents a flower each to just say, like, you come to my class every week, 2 hours a week, and showing up to be a more mindful parent. It's just like that just gives me a lot of hope. And I just want to honor that. And I was really touched and just made me reflect after all these years. Yeah, I didn't ever given people a rose before. I should have been doing this for years,
sweet.
but it was really lovely. And a few parents were quite touched when they really thought about, I was really, really honored to have them in my class.
Yeah. So if anything, Simone, I would say the stepping back, and I like that you edited it here with see how you can improve, but also see how much you're doing already, because it's so huge. So anyhow, but thank you again. This has been fun on my end. I'm sure we will speak again, but good talking.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. Cool.
Goodbye.
Adios, Saul. All right. Coming out of my conversation with Simone, which, wow, I realized we had a while back now, I'm really reminded again of just how challenging working with children or having children can be at times, but also just how much fun it is. So it was just cool to have that kind of combination talking with Simone. Now, I hope the questions Simone and I asked each other got you thinking a bit about how you interact with your own children or students. And if you found even one of our answers helpful in even the smallest of ways, then I'm happy with what we put out here. A quick note on the overall podcast, whether you've been enjoying it or you have some suggestions for future episodes, please share. It is great to get your feedback, and many of the episodes come directly from listeners' comments and questions, actually. So send them in. You can leave your thoughts or review directly on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, or feel free to write me, Jesse, Jesse, at MontessoriEducation.com. Oh, and if you want to get a hold of Simone Davies or learn more about her work, visit themontessorinotebook.com. Lots to be gained there for sure, so check it out.